Welcome to the cockpit. My name's Ryan and I'll be your pilot tonight. I have a very special guest joining us tonight. I have Mr. Scott Mason from Play Like a Jet. Scott, how you doing tonight?
Thanks, Ryan. Don't know how special I am, but I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, you're special. Boys and girls, make sure you hit that like button on the way in here. If you like doing some of these interview type things, a little bit more collaborative with the channel. Right now, we got a bunch of topics we can get into. We're going to talk about the Bryce Huff stuff. We'll talk a little bit about Sam Howell, some of the 𝐀𝐿𝐟𝐢𝐥𝐢𝐚𝐭 stuff, as well as all your questions that pop up throughout the live chat. Thank you guys so much for hopping in here. All right, Scott, let's hop over to our first topic of the night. And this is one coming from today. The New York Jets are expected to have $15 million in salary cap space thanks to an unprecedented amount of salary cap increase from last year to this year. We were thinking it was going to be about $20 million. It ends up being about $30 million. So the cap goes up to $255 million total for each team. So it's not a Jet exclusive thing. Of course, every team goes up by that extra $10 million. What are your thoughts about the increase? And do you think Bryce Huff has a shot at staying with us?
The increase is good. I mean, obviously it helps the Jets with creating extra cap space, although there is that inflation effect in the sense that it also increases the cap space for the other teams, which means they also have more money to spend on free agents. So you have to keep that in mind. As far as Bryce Huff, I don't know if this changes much of anything. I've said all along I would like to see them find a way to, at the very least, tag him and be able to get something in a trade, because at best, if they don't do that, they're going to get a third-round comp pick next year, and that's only if they don't get a free agent, a top-tier free agent. I think it's somebody within the first week or whatever it is. I forget the exact parameters, but if the Jets sign somebody meaningful, they probably won't get anything for Bryce Huff, and that's really bad because Bryce Huff was arguably their best pure pass rusher last year, and he's developed into a really good player. I'm not saying that he's an elite pass rusher, but in terms of what it is he brings to the table situationally, he's excellent. Now, he's not the best run defender in the world, but he's also, I don't think, as bad as some people say. And I really would like to see the Jets retain their first truly good homegrown pass rusher in a long time. Jermaine Johnson played really well this past year too, but Bryce Huff, first guy to have double-digit sacks as a Jets outside pass rusher, not counting Muhammad Wilkerson, who of course was an interior guy, since Calvin Pace. And it's the first time that a guy the Jets drafted or signed as an undrafted free agent, somebody that came into the league as a Jet, we shall say, had double-digit sacks since John Abraham left the team. And you're going a long time back for that, almost 20 years. So it'd be a shame to see him go. I don't think the raise in cap does anything here. I think the Jets are going to think that they've got Will McDonald and they've got Jermaine Johnson. They're already heavily invested, and they need to take that money and spend it elsewhere, and I understand. But I still would like to see a scenario where they would at least, if they don't keep him, they would at least find a way to tag him, trade him, and get something for him. But I'm not sure they're going to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. The extra $10 million in my mind, like maybe all teams knew this was what's actually going to happen, but in my mind, that's bonus $10 million that you were not planning to necessarily wheel and deal with. And if that helps you at least franchise tag Huff, like I understand if you don't want to keep him because of the Will McDonald contract and bringing him in last year on the first round, trading up for Jermaine Johnson, he's obviously looked really good, but to just let a premier edge rusher go with, you know, no benefit. You're not getting anything back. You're not there's no trade asset that you're getting back. The comp pick, like you mentioned, is tied to what type of contracts we wind up signing at the very beginning of free agency. If the Jets go after a Mike Evans or a Tyron Smith or a Jonah Williams, that very well may knock off the comp pick that we would have received from a Bryce Huff. So at the very least, you franchise tag him and you carry an extra $10 million into the draft. You can always restructure contracts, push money into 2025, 2026. Basically what Rodgers did in the summer, he pushed more money into next year or into the 2024 year. And then once they figured out what they had, they restructured the contract again and brought some of that money back into 2023. So it's not like this can't be done and can't be figured out. The Jets are just being boneheaded about it. And like the worst case situation, if it's Joe Douglas's like mind, I feel like is Huff accidentally having to play on the franchise tag because no one wants to trade for him based on like whatever perceived asking price we want to have for him. I would imagine Joe Douglas would still trade him at any point if he actually wanted the cap space back. But just to let him leave for nothing is so infuriating when we haven't been able to develop anyone from a pass rush presence on the outside. And look, Will McDonald could very well take the same leap that Jermaine Johnson took this past year. But man, it's just frustrating, especially when you look at what kind of cap space we're ultimately going to have. Because I did this a little bit before, and this is, nope, wrong button. Where am I clicking? Bam, cuts. If you restructure Mosley, JFM, Reed, Conklin, or extend them in any capacity, or heck, if Mosley just signs an upright renewed contract, which, would basically accomplish the same thing. You trade Zach Wilson, which we're already expecting, whether it's 5.4 or $1 million, depending on what you get back. If we have to eat the roster bonus, then it would be a $1 million savings versus the $5.4 million savings if you just trade it outright. And then cutting Laken Tomlinson, I think most people are on board with. Cutting 𝐂𝐻𝐢𝐥𝐢𝐚, most people on board with. Then some minimal cuts, around $4.2 million in savings. The Jets will have $74.9 million in savings. You're telling me you can't find a way to keep one of the best, percentage-wise edge rushers, situational pass rushers in the NFL? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and the thing is too, Ryan, one other thing that I think we forgot to mention is not only could they tag and trade him, but obviously if they tagged him and they didn't get a deal they liked, and they weren't comfortable with having him play for $20 million this year, they could release the tag. I remember that happened a few years ago.
I think if he signs it, they're locked in. Well, Yannick Ngakoue was not signed on the tag, and they rescinded it at that point.
Right, but I assume that Huff is going to probably, I would think, take it all the way down to the wire in terms of signing that franchise tag, because he probably is going to want, and he's made this very clear, that he wants the security of more money longer term. So he's going to want that big signing bonus, the whole deal. I would imagine that he would take it right down to the wire, and they can release that tag until he were to sign it. And we saw that with Josh Norman a few years ago. You just mentioned Yannick Ngakoue's situation. That's one of those things where then it would be, okay, you sign it, and then we'll move you to where you want to go. It's going to be an interesting play here from Douglas because, like I said, we know they have bigger needs. They've got to do something on the offensive line. They've got to do something with weapons around Aaron Rodgers. And obviously, they have much bigger weaknesses on the defense, even at linebacker, at safety, and even on the interior defensive line. But to have a guy like this who can really create so much pressure, I mean, look, the three most important things, I think, and we can talk about weapons and all that, that's very important too. Having the quarterback, protecting the quarterback, and putting the opposing quarterback on his butt, right? And obviously Huff is one of the better players in the league at doing the third thing. And the Jets for years had trouble getting guys that could do that at a high level. And so to see Bryce Huff walk in, obviously there's the element of anytime you have a player who makes his bones with the team and develops into a really good player like this, it's especially sad to see him go. I remember somebody saying to me, why were Jets fans so invested in Wayne Chrebet? He wasn't that good. It's not like he was some Pro Bowler or All-Pro or whatever. And it's because, Wayne Chrebet was always making huge first down catches. Wayne Chrebet was constantly taking these ridiculous hits and somehow bouncing back at 5'10", 180 pounds. But also it was the story, right? Here's a guy, he was a Hofstra guy, grew up on Long Island, and then he comes to the Jets as an undrafted free agent, and he makes his mark as their best receiver his rookie year. And then they still go out and they draft a guy in Keyshawn Johnson with the number 1 overall pick in the 96 draft. and yet still it's Corbett and Keyshawn as the dynamic duo, and you have the rivalry with Keyshawn Johnson, who is the NFL equivalent of the silver spoon guy because he comes into the league as the number 1 overall pick, and there's the expectations and the certain privileges that come along with that, as opposed to Corbett, who's the Cinderella story, the local kid, all of that, obviously Keyshawn from the West Coast. So there was a romanticism of Wayne Corbett on top of everything, and I think there's part of that with Bryce Huff, undrafted free agent, comes in here, works hard, over each season becomes better and better and better. Everybody was saying he was due for breakout. He was due for breakout because if you looked at the percentages, his efficiency was so good, and they gave him more snaps this year, and he rewarded them by saying, hey, it's not just a fluke. I can do this if you give me more snaps. So there's so many aspects to it that would make it sad to lose him. But as of right now, everybody you talk to, and just using common sense, it appears that he's probably going to end up not getting tagged, and he's probably going to end up going somewhere else. But I would hope that the Jets would find a way to either keep him or, like I said, tag him and be able to get something for him. I just don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, I feel like they're kind of stuck in their ways at this point. They're just going to do what they're going to do. And, you know, as soon as he signs the tag, I'm sort of the opposite opinion as far as him waiting to sign the tag. I think he would actually sign it immediately and then lock in that rate for a year. And then with salary cap, you know, continuing to go up, he just basically guarantees an entire season. If he gets hurt, he's guaranteed $21.6 million. So it's, you know, I think he would sign it being an undrafted free agent, but I could be surprised, you know, it could go the other way. But either way, I don't expect the Jets to actually wind up franchise tagging him, and I think he is going to walk for absolutely nothing, and it's so incredibly frustrating. I agree. Wayne Corbett, you know, the love affair with him was just undrafted guy, local kid, undersized, the Green Lantern, always getting that third down catch when he needed it. It was always just, I mean, growing up, I have his signed football in my closet right there. Like, my hands down favorite player of all time is Wayne Corbett. So, like, growing up, I wasn't like the tallest kid either, so it was just kind of like a, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
I saw it as like, wow, that's what I could be if I made it into the NFL. So it was a nice little thing to have. Blitz Crew drops in. He says, to max his money, he will hold off signing. Worth the risk of tagging now. Shoot for a second or a third. Thoughts on Locke for a backup quarterback over Hal? So Blitz Crew seems to agree with you. He thinks he'd hold off on signing to try and get a bigger deal. If that's the case, I don't know why the Jets, I mean, I guess it would eliminate the cap off our salary cap anyway,
Right.
even if he doesn't sign it. It's just we're not able to use it because that money is sort of hanging out there. Man, super frustrating. As far as Drew Lock, you think he might be an option for the New York Jets as a backup quarterback over someone like Sam Howell? And we could even move over into the Sam Howell conversation at this point.
Yeah, I mean, so Drew Lock and Sam Howell are both similar to me in the sense that you see the upside, you see the flashes, and then you also see a lot of the mistakes and the downside. And that's really why Drew Lock has never been able to be a starter in the league. And you sort of look at, to me, the backup quarterback position is one of two things, right? You either want a guy who has upside, but hasn't necessarily reached his ceiling, and you're hoping that he can grow, or you're looking at what I call an old reliable, right? Like a Jacoby Brissett or a Gardner Minshew or Andy Dalton, like somebody who's shown you through the years that they can step in for a couple of games, hold down the fort, and not lose you the season. So, like, look, we both know that if Aaron Rodgers gets hurt again, and let's please hope that doesn't happen, the ceiling of what the team can accomplish drastically reduces. So if you have, say, Brissett or Minshew, instead of thinking, well, maybe the ceiling is a really deep playoff run into the Super Bowl, the ceiling now becomes fighting for a playoff berth. Now, obviously, anything can happen, right? Like, you get hot, and we've seen it before. An Eagles team with Nick Foles at quarterback. Now, again, part of this was because Carson Wentz was so good that it put the Eagles in position to be the seed that had all those advantages, and then Nick Foles was just kind of along for the ride at the end. But still, if you, let's say something like that happened and Rodgers got hurt in like week 13 and like a Brissett or Minshew stepped in, yeah, it's certainly possible. Anything can happen, any given Sunday, as they say. But with a Sam Howell or Drew Lock is one thing because I believe he's a free agent, so they wouldn't have to give up anything for him. The interesting thing for me with Howell, Ryan, and I'm curious what you think about this, you clearly saw the upside last year. I mean, he threw for almost 4,000 yards. It was very much a Jameis Winston sort of thing, right? A lot of touchdowns, a lot of interceptions, some flashes that made you go, wow, this guy could be something. And then some like absolute boneheaded mistakes where you're scratching your head, right? But the thing for me with Sam Howell is that, number one, you'd have to trade something for him. And I still don't really understand why Washington would want to move him. They've got 2 more cheap years on him. And if they draft a quarterback, he gives them an insurance policy in case the kid's not ready to play right away, right? But if you do trade for him, now you're giving up, let's say, a 3rd or 4th round pick, I would assume is what it would take. You bring him in, and now the plan, of course, is sit him behind Aaron Rodgers. Now, of course, it's always possible, and again, I hope this doesn't happen, that Rodgers gets hurt. But if not, you're thinking Rodgers probably is aiming to play 2 years. Now, if you're extra lucky, maybe you get 3 out of him. But right now, I think the reasonable ceiling is 2 years. So at that point, Howell sits behind Rodgers, and then he's a free agent. So you just gave up a 3rd or 4th round pick for a guy that's going to wind up being a free agent by the time you're ready to even see if he has what it takes to be your starter. So that's the one area where I understand on paper why people would see the flashes and think it's a good idea. But then to me, it's like, I'd rather use a 4th round pick or a 5th round pick or whatever on a guy who maybe hasn't shown you anything in the NFL yet, but who gives you 4 cheap years, so that if you say sat him behind Rodgers and he ended up developing into something, you would have a shot to use him before having to decide whether or not to pay him or just straight up losing him altogether. So whether that's somebody like Spencer Rattler or, the kid from Tulane, whose name is escaping me right now, Michael Pratt. Yeah, Michael Pratt, Jordan Travis, who obviously is going to need a year to sit with his injury anyway.
The nice thing is you can IR Jordan Travis, so you can carry 2 quarterbacks into the season, which is interesting.
Right. And then, obviously there's guys like Carter Bradley who turned some heads at the Senior Bowl from
Joe
South
Milton
Alabama.
A late pick or undrafted.
Sure. Or Devin Leary from Kentucky, guys like that. So, yeah, I mean, Howell has shown you something in the NFL, but what he's also done is used up 2 of his 4 cheap years. I just don't know if the timeline matches up. I get the sentiment of the potential and why you would think it's something that makes sense. But on the other end of it, the contract side, and this was always the problem with Zach Wilson too, was, okay, let's say he plays well or whatever, and you decide, or he doesn't say play well, but the idea initially was Aaron Rodgers plays for 2 years or whatever, and then you have Wilson. You're not picking up the 5th-year option, so you would have to hope you could get some sort of deal done with Wilson once he becomes a free agent, and you still don't really know what he can do. You're just kind of extrapolating. That's sort of what you would have to do with Sam Howell, even though obviously we saw more from Howell than we did from Zach Wilson. So, Ryan, I'm curious what you think, because I understand it, and it's interesting, and it stirs the conversation right now. But the fact that he's 2 years into that 4-year deal and you're counting on Rodgers to play at least 2 years is what really, to me, is what puts a stake in the heart there a little bit.
Yeah, you and I align perfectly on this, because there's a few problems I see with this. One, the contract duration, which exactly, you're expecting Rodgers to play 2 years. I think when they traded for Rodgers initially, that was the whole plan. They were going to do the whole, hey, let's try to make it seem like it's a 1-year deal to get the best deal possible from Green Bay. But I was thinking about retirement, all this sort of stuff. And then be like, oh, Zach sits behind him for a year, maybe 2 years. Then you develop Zach. I think they decided to trade Zach after the Jaguars game last year. I think they had that decision in their mind, and they're like, hey, at least if we get Rodgers and Rodgers commits to us towards the end of next year, we're going to have to trade Zach, not because he's bad, but because a Hall of Fame quarterback wound up committing to us, and now we have to move off of him because the contracts don't align up, which is exactly what you were just saying. And then with Howell, you run into like the same thing. It's 2 years of Rodgers, 2 years of Howell. You're not really going to see what you have with him. So like, I don't think the timeline matches up. And you mentioned, why would the Commanders even do this? Because they're going to draft a quarterback, let alone it's probably going to be Drake May at number 2, which was Sam Howell's roommate in college. So from what I've heard from Washington fans is they want this guy to be there. Like Howell wants to be there to help develop Drake May. And you know, eventually, you know, I feel like Washington is that team that had a number 2 overall pick at one point, that had a golden boy sitting behind him that was drafted in a mid-round pick, a la RG3 and Kirk Cousins. Like there's some degree of like fanhood that probably wants to keep Howell over there. And as far as what would it take to actually get him from the Commanders in general, I don't know if I want to give up a 4th round pick for Sam Howell right now. It's not that I wouldn't draft him in the 4th round, but it's like you said, the 2 extra years of contractual control that is really the valuable part here. And for the Jets this year, trying to go all in this year and next year, you can get someone that might be able to fulfill a need in those 4th rounds. So 1st round, 3rd round, you know, let's say you go tackle, wide receiver. 4th round could very easily be interior offensive line and defensive tackle, or, you know, maybe an extra cornerback or something in there. And then, you know, you don't have a 5th round pick and you're taking stabs at the later rounds. But like, if I were the Commanders, I wouldn't move Howell for a 4th round pick, because I'm still going to have to probably use a 4th round pick on another backup quarterback. And I'd rather have the guy that knows the guy that's coming in and has a good relationship with him than, and you know, he does well, at least where he's been with the players you have. So yeah, I'm right there with you. I don't think this makes any sort of sense from really either side's perspective.
Yeah. And I'll say this too. I think it's a little bit different if you're talking about, let's say, Denver, right? They don't have anything at quarterback right now. So maybe they think, okay, we'll trade a 3rd and a conditional 3 next year. Like, let's say it's a 3rd this year and a 5th next year that becomes a 3rd if Howell throws for 4,000 yards or makes 12 starts or whatever the condition is, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's a team like Denver, or even like, let's say Tampa doesn't wind up bringing back Baker Mayfield because he's too expensive, and they say, you know what, we like what we saw from this Howell kid. Let's trade for him. We'll put him in a quarterback competition and see who rises to the top. Minnesota, right? Let's say they're not able to get who they want in the draft. So they try. I'm just throwing out different teams that don't necessarily have an established answer at quarterback. And now you're bringing in Howell with the idea of he has all this upside and we think he might have what it takes to be a starter. So we'll have him compete with somebody and, you know, whatever. Okay, then it's not that big of a deal that he only has 2 years left on the contract, because if he just ends up being a backup for you for 2 years, well, you got him with the intention of at least trying to see if he could be a starter. And if somebody else beats him out, somebody else beats him out, right? But with the Jets, the only way he's playing, if they get him, is if Rodgers goes down. And so, again, you come back to the contract and how it doesn't match up. And then you think about the fact that the Jets could sign somebody like Andy Dalton or Minshew or Brissett, or pick whichever backup quarterback you like who's a veteran that has shown they can be a steady hand when they need to play for a couple of games. And you can do that without making a trade. Like, why, like you said, why trade an asset to get a guy that, you know, under ideal circumstances is only going to play if your guy gets hurt, and then in 2 years he's going to be a free agent and other teams will have a crack at him anyway. It just seems like you said, in when you're in win now mode, you can use that pick. And I mean, I suggested this is just one example. A guy like Zach Zinter, the guard from Michigan.
Zinter. Big fan.
Yeah. And Zinter, to me, is one of the best interior linemen in the draft. Now, he is going to likely fall, and the reason is because he had that injury, so nobody knows for sure if he's going to be ready to go right away. Now, obviously, the medicals will tell the tale here, and we'll see where he goes. But if, say, he falls to the 4th, and the idea is, all right, he may not be able to play right away, or maybe he comes in mid-season, or maybe he even redshirts year 1, part of the reason his value would drop is because what we're talking about with the contract. You get a guy for 4 cheap years. If one of those years is a year that you're not going to be able to utilize, then the value goes down and you're not picking him as high as you would if you knew you were going to have him for the 4 cheap years playing on the field for you. So With the Jets, yeah, you would ideally want a guy that can come in immediately and make an impact. But a guy like Zinter, if the plan is for Rodgers to play 2 years and he's a 4th-round pick, right? And again, 4th-round pick, you're probably not getting a guy who's going to necessarily start right away, but he could be a contributor. So, like, just as an example, let's throw a receiver's name out there, like Ricky Pearsall from Florida. He could be a 3rd or 4th receiver year 1, and then he gets some seasoning and gets more playing time year 2, whatever. With a guy like Zinter, it's sort of a similar situation where maybe he doesn't start right away because of the injury, but in year 2 of the Rodgers experiment, well, year 3, but year 2 of him actually playing, assuming he comes back, now you've got a guy who's really caught on to the system, he's capable and all that, and you drafted him in the 4th round, so you're still getting pretty good value out of him. You're giving up something like that, or even pick another interior offensive lineman, whoever it is you like that you think might be able to develop into a starter or a receiver. You heard Daniel Jeremiah say on the conference call the other day that he thinks there's going to be some receivers in the 3rd and 4th round that could be good. I mentioned Ricky Pearsall. I love Malachi Corley, the Yak really guy from Western Kentucky. The only problem with him is I don't think you would get him in the 4th round, but you get where I'm going with this. So it just, again, I understand the thought because there's all that potential with Hal, but it just doesn't seem to be a good fit with the Jets situation.
Yeah, on the Zinter thing as well, what's kind of interesting is, like, I would love to play Tippmann at guard next year. I thought he was like A+ at guard. He was fine at center, but like to some degree, Rodgers wanted to play with McGovern or a veteran center anyway. So if you draft someone like a Zinter, he's your heir apparent at right guard after, this year. Then you wind up moving Tippmann over, and then you have Zinter possibly slot in there. AVT, I would love to keep at left guard. And then obviously the tackles, you got to kind of figure out. One's probably coming by way of number 10, the other one probably by way of free agency. But we'll get into that in just a little bit here. Ron Weiss comes in with a super chat. Thank you so much, Ron. Dropping a 10 spot, says, Ryan, what about Lazard restructuring, and how are the girls? The girls are good. We just finished bath time. They are in bed sleeping. I guess it was 7 o'clock was when we did that, but they are knocked out right now. Lovely little angels. As far as Lazard restructuring, he's got a $12 million cap hit for this season. Then we have 2 more years at $13 million cap hits, and then he has 1 year of a void year in 2027 where he would not be on the roster. Now, realistically, we're expecting to cut him probably after this year. You could restructure him. You'd save $6.6 million, and you'd probably eat some amount of dead cap in addition in 2025 compared to what you were only going to have. So I don't know exactly how it would fully work with that particular deal. You could save some money. I don't know if that would force you to retain him for 1 extra year beyond, which may not be the worst case anyway, because if Rodgers does like throwing to him and Rodgers here 1 extra year, it is what it is. I think that was a signing we probably all wish we had back at this point. What are your feelings on Lazard?
Well, listen, the Jets are stuck with him this year. I tried explaining this. There was some guy on Twitter who kept telling me how they're going to cut him and all. I'm like, they can't cut him. It would cost them more money to cut him than to keep him. He's like, well, sometimes you just got to pull off the Band-Aid. I'm like, dude, you're not hearing me. It would literally cost them several million more dollars on the cap to keep him than to cut him. So you'd be better off sitting his ass on the bench all year than cutting him. It makes no sense. I think the only thing you can say with Lazard is you have to hope that connection he has with Aaron Rodgers helps him bounce back in year number 2 with the Jets. And whether that happens or not, I couldn't tell you for sure. But it's difficult because Lazard, I think, in a lot of ways sort of got exposed as a product of Rodgers. And look, there's an aspect of this that people forget. Like, we've seen receivers go to other teams and not necessarily be as good. Now, certain guys are going to be great no matter what, but we've seen examples. I mean, I'll give you one. I remember Deion Branch, who the Jets tried like hell to sign. Mangini really wanted him. He goes to Seattle, and it just wasn't working. It wasn't working at all. The offense didn't make sense for him. He didn't have chemistry with the quarterback. He ends up getting cut, goes back to the Patriots, and all of a sudden he's catching touchdowns from Tom Brady again. So there are some guys that are just a perfect fit for a certain system or a certain quarterback, and you have to hope that that's what it is with Lazard, that once Rodgers comes back, he gets back to normal. Now, to be fair, his best career production with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback was like 788 yards, which is fine. But I said all along, he was not really a number 2 level receiver. He was really more of a number 3 in a good offense. And so we'll see what they do. I think the Jets should really make a run at Mike Evans and Calvin Ridley. Those guys, to me, are easily going to be, assuming they don't get tagged, which it's looking like they won't. They're easily the best receivers on the market. Look, Ridley started out rough, and to be fair, he was rusty and all that, but he finished really strong. He had almost 1,000 yards, and I think he's a guy that
went just over 1,000. I think one of the triggers of his deal, I think the final week of the season he hit it. It was like 75 receptions and 1,000 yards triggered the deal to go from a fourth to a third. And if they keep him, it drops to a second.
Okay, I thought he hit 970. I guess somebody double check us on that. I thought it was like 970. Either way, the point is, to me, those are the two guys that, across from Garrett Wilson, give you a significant upgrade at wide receiver. So if you can't get Evans, go and get Calvin Ridley. Now, again, I say this every year, not to splash cold water on people, but if those two guys hit the open market, you're going to have like a dozen teams fighting for them. So let's not pretend like the Jets are going to be able to definitely get one. But I would pursue those guys. And then, of course, I've talked about this on my show. The ultimate prize, if he does become available, the guy I would target above anybody else is I would do what I could if Brandon Ayuk becomes available in a trade, because I think Brandon Ayuk is a guy who is just only scratching the surface of how good he is. And this is a guy that had he was 7th in the NFL in receiving yards, despite being 30th in targets. You look at his efficiency numbers, they're off the charts. Yards per catch, yards per route run, stuff like that. One of the best route runners in the league. Sauce pointed this out the other day, that he's a guy that's such a good contested catch guy that he doesn't even have to be open, so to speak. And so, to me, at 25 years old, if you can get him, and I know you'd have to pay him, but the first year's $14 million, which is very manageable. You put him and Garrett Wilson together with Aaron Rodgers. And by the way, he gets open so quickly too, which Rodgers loves. So I just think you put him and Garrett Wilson together, and that is just an absolute nightmare for defenses. And people will say, well, what if you can't pay him and then you got to pay Garrett Wilson? Well, listen, Garrett Wilson still has 2 cheap years on his deal, then a 5th-year option, and then after that, you could franchise tag him. You pay Ayuk, you pay him 14 this year, and then you're locked in for 2-3 years. I mean, you could kind of time it out where, you could choose to move on from one and keep the other, or whatever it is you want to do. But if you're in this short win now window, to have those two guys with Aaron Rodgers would be absolutely incredible. I mentioned the possibility of, if he became available, flipping the 10th pick for the 31st pick.
Oh, like this one right here. Bam! Graphic ready.
There you go. Because Ryan, in this class, it's very deep. At tackle, I think you could get a starting caliber tackle 31. Now, it may not be as good as the guy you could get at 10, but that's okay if you're getting Ayuk. And then I even said, look, if you had to sweeten the pot and give up a pick next year, like a 5th rounder next year or something, I'd be all right with that. But we'll see. If he becomes available, that to me is the ultimate target. But if not, you go after Mike Evans, you go after Calvin Ridley, and then whatever you get, this is how I would approach it with Lazard. I consider him a sunk cost. Anything you get from him at this point is a bonus. So if he turns out to be a good number 3, like he bounces back and gives you production that's a pretty good number 3, great. You're playing with house money at that point.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Ayuk is someone that I am 100% on board with. That it would be probably one of the few receivers that I'm like, yep, 100%, I will give up a 1st-round pick. Going from 10 to 31 doesn't make me feel super comfortable. I'll admit that. Now that point difference is about the point difference of the 26th overall pick, 700 points. And you got to think there's going to be a team out there that would offer a 1st-round pick. Now, maybe San Francisco doesn't trade him to Kansas City for the 32nd overall pick because of what just happened in the Super Bowl, but I could see a situation where there's teams wanting to give up a first round pick for Ayuk, and maybe our connection, Saleh and Shanahan, has some type of fruit there. Now, where I do want to ask you, would you be open to a different trade? Let's say the Jets could not extend DJ Reed, or maybe they're thinking, not that far ahead, and they're like, hey, we saw how Brandon Echols and how Bryce Hall played when we faced the Eagles. We had no Sauce, no Reed, and the defense handled themselves just fine. Maybe it's worth, sacrificing a little bit of this defense to get someone that would be such a massive upgrade on the offensive side of the ball. And if they're both going to need new contracts, you're probably paying Ayuk $10 million more than Reed realistically, if I had to guess. Would you do a DJ Reed, Brandon Ayuk trade, or are you thinking more draft pick because DJ Reed is so valuable to this defense right now?
I mean, I'd consider it. I don't know that the Niners would be looking to do that, because I think the biggest part of the reason they'd be looking to trade Brandon Ayuk is because they can't pay him. And a big part of the reason they can't pay him is because Deebo Samuel. It's kind of funny. 2 years ago, the Jets were trying so hard to get him. They offered the 10th pick in the draft that they ended up using on Garrett Wilson. Sometimes, and look, as dynamic of a weapon as Deebo Samuel is, sometimes the best trades are the ones you don't make. He's hurt quite a bit, and now he's due to count $28 million on the cap this year. So that's a big part of the reason why, if they trade Ayuk, it'll be because they can't afford to have him and Deebo at the same time. If the Niners were interested in getting DJ Reed back, because let's not forget, that's where DJ Reed started his career. He was drafted in the 5th round and actually was there during the Robert Saleh years, I believe. So what it ultimately comes down to for me is, would the Niners want a guy in Reed who they either have on a 1-year deal or they have to extend for a decent amount of money, or would they rather have that? Well, now, to be fair, I don't think a Reed for Ayuk straight up thing is happening anyway. If it was Reed, and it would be Reed plus a bunch of stuff. But I'm just saying, would they rather? Because think about it, right? If you're number 31, you move up to 10. Now you could either draft a receiver, or if there's a guy you really want to go up for, you could do that. You could go up a couple of spots and you could grab, let's say Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze or whoever it is you like, right? And so the idea would be, it's sort of like what they did, although it didn't work out as well as they thought it would. But if you remember when they traded DeForest Buckner to the Colts, they took that pick and they drafted Javon Kinlaw, thinking we're going to get somebody who, even if he gives us 90% of Buckner, we're getting him on the cheap for 5 years instead of paying Buckner because we just paid Armstead. Now, it hasn't worked out that way, because obviously Buckner is a much, much, much better player than Kinlaw, who just hasn't worked out to what they were hoping he would be. But you get what I'm saying. They could be thinking, hey, we get this 10th pick, we draft the replacement for Ayuk at a fraction of the cost. And then now they're working towards the idea of what a Brock Purdy contract extension is going to look like and all of that. And so I think they'd probably rather get the draft picks, if I were to guess. But if I had to put DJ Reed in a deal, depending on what the deal is, I'd definitely consider it.
Yeah, I wonder if they'd consider a 2025 first. I feel like that would be a little more appealing to me, because you're hoping that pick is going to wind up being in the late 20s, 30s with an Aaron Rodgers here. And that's, maybe that's why the 49ers wouldn't do it. But right now, this year, they have a first, a second, and then they have 2 picks in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th round. So they got a lot of draft picks coming their way from all those comp picks, from all the coaches and GMs that were hired from their staff. We got Kelvin coming in. He says, what would it take to trade up to number 5? So right now, number 5 is the Chargers. Chargers sitting there at number 5. This is why I would tag Huff. I would tag Huff because the Chargers are going to lose Khalil Mack. They're probably going to have to restructure or trade Joey Bosa. And if there's a situation where like extending a Huff who's younger on that, longer term deal nets us the ability to go up and get a Joe Alt at number 5, like compared with the addition of pick number 10, I would much rather do that than anything else. As far as like going up to number 5, you got to think it would cost at least a 2 next year and probably an additional pick this year It's not going to be cheap to go up to 5.
Yeah, I would think you might be looking at that 3rd round pick this year and, and an additional pick next year, or like you said, a 2 next year. I just, man, it's tough for me. The only way I would really consider it is if you either think that Joe Alt is so much better than all the other tackles that you just have to have him, or let's say Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze is sitting there at 5, and you are absolutely convinced that that guy is going to be another Jamar Chase or whoever it is. I'm just throwing out names of elite receivers, and you just have to have that guy. I guess you could talk yourself into it, but I think the far better move in a draft like this that's stacked with offensive line talent and pretty good receivers too, especially guys you could probably get on day 2, would be to try and move back. Now, I've talked about this on the show, Ryan, on Play Like a Jet. I think you could move back, and even if you move back and can't get a first, a second, you might be able to get a 3rd, and then now you're sitting there with 2 3s, and you have the ability with 2 3s and 2 4s to move back up into the 2nd round and double dip at offensive line. And I will say this, it doesn't have to be 2 tackles. Yeah, on paper, you would prefer that. But let's just, for the sake of argument, say that the Jets are sitting at 10. The Raiders call and want to jump the Vikings and the Broncos for whoever, whether it's a quarter, let's say JJ McCarthy. I'm just throwing that name out there.
Yeah.
So you move down for a 3rd or something, right? And now you move down to 13. You take either Fuaga or Latham, right? And now you have the 2 3s and the 2 4s. You could theoretically use one of those 3s and one of those 4s, and maybe even like a next year's 4 or something if you need to, move back up into the middle of the 2nd round. And here's where you could get, whether it's a Patrick Paul potentially or somebody like that. Now we'll see how the board shakes out, but even a Cedric Van Pran, the center from Georgia, who I think is an absolute monster. You floated the idea before of using Tippmann at guard. You take Van Pran, he's your center. Let's say you get Latham or Fuaga to play tackle in round 1. You've now got your center in Van Pran. You've got a guard with Tippmann. You've got another guard in Vera Tucker. You've got a tackle that you took in Latham or Fuaga. And then, assuming you sign somebody tackle in free agency, or you could even stick with Laken Tomlinson at guard and move AVT back to tackle if you want to go that way. But it opens up possibilities for you. But at least then you have the potential to get 2 legitimate day 1 starters on the offensive line, which is very, very important here. And I think people have to keep that in mind. What Daniel Jeremiah said, and what a lot of people have said, is that this draft is loaded with offensive linemen, but all the best ones are probably going in the first 2 rounds or somewhere thereabouts. So if you want to double dip, that would be a way you could do it. And so that's why, like I said, even if you slide down a little, even if you can't pick up that extra 2nd rounder you want, you could get extra ammo that you could use to move back up into the 2nd round. People have floated the idea of using a next year's first to move to get a 2nd rounder this year. I don't love that, only because we already saw, Ryan, what happens. Like, God forbid Rodgers gets hurt again or something, and then the Jets are sitting there with a top 5 or top 10 pick again. I get the idea you want that guy right now, but I wouldn't be comfortable with it. But if you use a 3 and a 4 to move up into the 2nd round, that's a different story. That you could talk me into for sure.
Yeah, that's appealing. I love the idea of a trade down. I'm 100% not in on a trade up from number 10, but coming down from 12, going down from 10 to 11 to 12 to 13, one of those picks for a team that wants a JJ McCarthy or whatever pick you think they want to leap up for. I would love the idea of like the Broncos coming up. We'll slide down 2 picks. they want to toss us Cortland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy instead of giving up an additional draft pick, they got to make some salary cap space for themselves. I would take either one of those players in a trade down and then do the same thing you said, package a third and a fourth to go all the way up into the second round to get another offensive lineman. I think Van Pran would be an awesome addition at the center position. And then, like you said, it's, you have the flexibility of AVT, Tippmann, to kind of move them around where you sort of see fit at this point. Blitzcrew comes in. Blitzcrew says, would be happy if we even got Gabe Davis or Darnell Mooney. Still a major upgrade at wide receiver 2, who is a realistic offensive line target. Is O-line is where I want to spend more than anywhere. So as far as Gabe Davis and Darnell Mooney, I would not mind signing them, but I don't know if I feel comfortable with them being like number 2. Like Darnell Mooney to me is kind of like almost like an adjacent to Curtis Samuel. Curtis Samuel is a little more of like a slot guy where Darnell Mooney might be going, deep and taking the top off of a defense. Gabe Davis is almost like a carbon copy of what we were hoping to get out of Lazard. I think Gabe's probably better at contested catches, but I don't know if we go that route. So I guess I'll ask you that first. What do you think about Gabe Davis and Darnell Mooney? And then we'll go on to the realistic offensive line targets.
Yeah, I think you're right, man. I think Mooney and Davis are like solid receivers, but I feel like you gotta try to do better than that. Mm-hmm. If they end up being your fallback plan, one of those two, it's better than what you have. But look, last year I was worried about this, and I talked about it multiple times. And in fact, if you remember, Ryan, when I came on the show, this was one thing I talked about was people were talking like the Jets are these Super Bowl contenders and all that. And I said, you look at the supporting cast and, there's a fair amount to be desired. And part of my concern was I didn't think Lazard was good enough to be a number 2. And I didn't really think Corey Davis was. I think you had 2 guys that were really number 3s and you really needed more. And that's why I advocated repeatedly to go and get DeAndre Hopkins, who people told me was washed up, but I knew wasn't because I had watched his tape and I saw the production he put up with no quarterback in Arizona. And look what he did in Tennessee with no quarterback this past year. So I remember saying that on your show. Man, I hope people take more kindly to this appearance on your show than they did the last time, because I remember reading the YouTube comments after that. I'm like, well, Ryan's never invite me back after this, because everybody was like, this guy sucks. He's the worst. Never have him on again, blah, 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 because I was, not all sunshine and rainbows. I try to be when I think it's warranted, but I'll be honest about it. So, like, that's one thing where I would be a little nervous. Like, you get Mooney, you get Gabe Davis, it's better than what you have, but then you kind of have to hope that you get lucky with a receiver in round 3 or 4, because if you don't, I don't know that you have enough in the passing game to really, compete with the big dogs, so to speak. So yeah, I mean, again, Mooney, Davis, definitely better than what they have, but they feel like solid number 3s to me more than what they actually need, which is a real Batman and Robin situation with Garrett Wilson and whoever it is they get. Now, obviously, we're talking about Calvin Ridley. He's the clear number 2. If it's a Mike Evans, you're talking 1A, 1B, right? So, but either way, I think they need a real, legitimately big upgrade at wide receiver, and those guys are fine, but I don't think they're quite enough.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I don't want to go with a Gabe Davis or a Mooney for that exact reason. As far as who's a realistic target for offensive line, we've seen David Bakhtiari's name thrown about. So I want to ask your thoughts on him. He's going to be released. Now, my thinking, I've been saying since last year Bakhtiari is going to happen. Now, this was prior to his week 1 injury, because you saw Rodgers restructure his contract. The money that was freed up was eerily similar to what Bakhtiari's deal would have been last year. Then he gets hurt. Seems like he's going to get cut because he's got a $40 million cap hit. They'll save $20 million off that contract. He's probably not passing a physical right now. So I don't know when Bakhtiari would realistically sign. So you might be in a situation where you're trying to solve offensive line before you even worry about Bakhtiari. Bakhtiari might not sign till after the draft. Like, it's entirely possible that's the case. And if you can get him on an incentive-laden deal, I've said this before, it's similar in some respects, different in others, but to like a Trent Williams from Washington. This guy had an injury history. He didn't play the entire year before he was traded to San Francisco. It was a big risk to roll on Trent Williams, and the 49ers decided to do it, and these types of elite tackles don't hit the market. So they took a gamble on it. They traded a 4th-round pick for him, paid him a halfway decent salary, not what tackles are getting now, but now they got like one of the best tackles in the NFL. Bakhtiari, one of the best tackles in the NFL. He's healthy. I think if you can get him at some point in the summer, it's a home run type move. But as far as like other offensive tackle options, I kind of like the idea of going after someone like a Jonah Williams, someone that can give you left tackle, right tackle flexibility. And then it kind of unlocks a little bit of number 10 in the event that Alt or Fashanu falls. Then you don't feel like you're like, okay, I have to go with one particular side of the ball. Like let's say you sign a Tyron Smith or something that can only play the left-hand side. Now you might be like, oh, Fashanu's on the board, but we're going to go with a Fuaga. And, maybe you like Fuaga more either way, or maybe it's a push. Regardless, I like the idea of having that kind of flexibility that we've already seen is incredibly valuable with a Tippmann and an AVT. So where do you kind of land on the offensive tackle side of things, or maybe just even offensive line? It wasn't even specified tackle here.
So I think everybody sort of has landed on Mike Onwenu from the Patriots being the best offensive line option in free agency. The thing with him is, though, he's going to have like 12 different teams trying to get him. So yeah, I'm sure the Jets will try, but let's keep our expectations realistic here. I think what this comes down to is like, if you sign a guy like David Bakhtiari, and I'm with you, I think it's going to happen because he and Rodgers are like best friends. So let's just throw that out there right now. He's missed 75% of his starts the last 3 seasons. And he's had 5 knee surgeries over the last 4 years. I just don't know that you should be expecting anything from him. And obviously, we take a look at the guys that Rodgers brought in here. And I mean, I guess the closest thing would be Dalvin Cook, who at one point was an elite player, but clearly had lost several steps. And look, I'm not saying Bakhtiari wasn't a great player, but man, you miss that many games and have that many knee surgeries. You get anything out of this guy, and it's house money. And listen, let's just say this. The Jets this past year were relying on 2 tackles with injury histories. And to his credit, Becton made it through the season, and he didn't miss that many games. But Dwayne Brown got hurt pretty quickly in the season and was gone. I think if you're getting Bakhtiari, really, to me, spending any real kind of money on him would be a mistake. If he's willing to come in here on a cheap deal that's very incentive-laden, and he's going to compete with Carter Warren or compete with somebody else you sign in free agency or compete with a guy you drafted in the 3rd round or whatever, all right, I guess. But I wouldn't be signing him counting on him to do anything. And I think at this point, look, you talk about a guy like Jonah Williams or something. Jonah Williams, let's just be honest about it. He's not really all that good.
Yeah, it's one of those like you overpay for mediocre production is what you'd be doing.
Yes. Exactly, which I get. I mean, they're in a kind of a desperate situation, but I just don't want to make him out to be more than he is. I mean, George Fant is another option, right? Bringing him back. I mean, is he anything special? No, but can he start and not embarrass you? I mean, I suppose. Realistically, you would love it if the Jets could do better than that in free agency, but I just don't see a lot of options. Look, good tackles that don't have major issues almost never hit the market. And you see that over and over and over again. If a tackle hits the market and has any value, usually it's a guy like a Mekhi Becton who is younger, has a lot of upside, but he has some baggage, whether that's injury stuff or off the field or whatever. Or it's a guy like Bakhtiari, who at one point was great, but he's had a million injuries or whatever it is. So I wish there were better options for the Jets, but I really think, and you saw La Sauce, as he calls himself, Sauce Gardner, on Twitter say, if it were him, he's going veteran receiver and then putting all his chips on young offensive linemen. And I think that makes sense because you could have a situation where if you aggressively go after Mike Evans and Calvin Ridley, maybe you land one of them. And if you do, then you can use your draft picks on offensive linemen, because the truth of the matter is you're not going to have anybody who's anywhere near the equivalent of those two guys available as a free agent on the offensive line. Like you said, Jonah Williams might be the best tackle, and I don't even know if he's an average tackle, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I don't love the tackle prospects for this upcoming free agency. You could argue, go into your offensive line and move AVT out to tackle, but I don't necessarily want AVT at tackle either. I feel like the Achilles is still going to be some type of a problem for him next year, and maybe sticking at guard might not be the worst way to go here. Let's see. We got Heisman Hennessy coming in with a $2 super chat. Says, who's the number 1 and number 2 free agent targets for Joe Douglas? I'm going to go a little outside the box, but I'm going to say, obviously we've been talking Mike Evans and Calvin Ridley. I'll say Mike Evans is number 1. And then number 2, I don't know if it's a Zeitler or if I'd have to go like almost defense. Like I could almost see a Fletcher Cox be a priority. We've tried to get him for like 2 seasons in a row now. I could see the Jets, maybe go in that direction. I don't know. What other free agent needs other than tackle and wide receiver would you do? I mean, I feel like tackle's kind of the obvious, number 2 or 1.
I would imagine that offense is going to be the priority. And I would think that they're probably, now listen, Joe Douglas has tried to trade for both Mike Evans and Calvin Ridley in the past, right? He tried to trade for Ridley before he got suspended. And then he tried to trade for Mike Evans twice this past year, first before the season and then again at the trade deadline, according to reports. So I would hope that those two guys are at the top of the list. I would think Onwenu is probably at the top of the list. Jonah Williams, I think, is somebody that will probably be high on the list just because, like we talked about, not that he's great, but you've got to get somebody that is capable of starting there. Those are the guys off the top of my head. I mean, I'm sure they're going to pursue some defensive guys, but I would think that they would be a little bit lower priority just because they have to understand that the key to the success of the team this year is adding pieces on offense and surrounding Rodgers with the talent he's going to need. And I would think that the top of their list would reflect that, but we'll see.
Yeah, get like a Mike Evans. Do you think there's any way that Odell ends up back in New York? We heard like, the rumors of him, just not even just rumors. He said he was close to ending up in New York on Marlon Humphrey's podcast. Do you think he winds up staying like in Baltimore? Do you think he winds up being some type of an option? I know Rodgers has always wanted to play with him, and I don't know. I don't want him to be wide receiver too, but if he was that add-on receiver like he would have been in the summer, I don't know if I would mind that. Just not at $15 million.
I don't know, man. The problem for me with Beckham is he's like just an okay receiver now. And he's been that for a few years. And I think people still hang on to that image of him as that guy who is that unbelievably talented elite receiver with the New York Giants. And he's just not that guy anymore. I mean, I don't even remember how many yards he had with the Ravens, but it was nothing impressive last year.
I think he was 600 yards, roughly, somewhere in that ballpark. Now, you could argue he opened other guys up. I think there's some degree of truth to that.
I mean, yeah, I guess. I don't know. I don't see him as being any different than a Darnell Mooney or a Gabe Davis, and I expect Beckham to want a significant amount of money again on a 1-year deal if he's signing a 1-year deal. And I just honestly, I don't know. I wouldn't love it. I was against it this past year because I just thought that number one, he wasn't an upgrade from Corey Davis to me. And number two, he was going to want too much money. And so, look, if they do it because he's friends with Rodgers, it is what it is, but it wouldn't thrill me.
Yeah, I'm kind of on that same thought process. We got another super chat in here, and then we'll wrap this up. Blitz Crew coming in says, no Jamal Adams. Hope we get Chuck Clark and Ashton Davis back. I fall in line with that. Like, honestly, I want Ashton Davis to, I don't care if he starts, but like at worst be our third safety. He's always around the ball. He's making some type of plays. So like there's some inherent clutch factor in that. As far as Chuck Clark, we didn't get to see anything from him. And I think more of the curiosity of me and the the contract is more appealing because I don't think, Whitehead comes back. I don't think we ever really invest much into safety. The biggest investment we made was a 3rd-round pick in Ashton Davis and a franchise tag on Marcus May. Outside of that, we've, shipped off Jamal Adams and really haven't gone crazy hard in free agency. What do you think we do at the safety position?
I'd love to see Chuck Clark back. I think the role that he's best suited for is sort of like a linebacker safety hybrid and a guy that has had a lot of success covering tight ends. I think he was going to be a nice chess piece. And of course, the guy who never misses any games ends up coming to the Jets and misses the entire season. So go figure.
Same thing happened with Rodgers. Same thing happened with Becton. Yep. Same, like literally every player. You go down the list.
Yep, exactly. He fell prey to the Jets curse. I'd like to see him back. I can't imagine it would cost a ton to bring him back. Ashton Davis would be nice to bring back just because I thought he played his best football this year. And I know he's not super young because I think he was like 23 when he got drafted. But still, it seems like maybe his best football is in front of him the next couple of years. I wouldn't mind seeing them take a swing on a safety later in the draft. See if you can get somebody in the 4th or 5th round, maybe. I'd have to take a look at who some of the middle level targets in free agency would be at safety, because I don't think it's a good idea to spend big money on a safety. I know somebody like Kyle Duggar will be available, but he just seems like an unrealistic target based on how much money he's probably going to get. But I do like the idea of bringing back Clark and Davis and then seeing if you can get somebody else. I mean, Tony Adams was like, I guess he wasn't awful this past year, but he wasn't.
Man, rain on people's parade. People love Tony Adams. Everything I hear is like, we love Tony Adams. He's going to be a starter for us next year. Like, not as high on him?
He's fine, I guess. But, like, look, Jordan Whitehead was the one, and, man, all the fights on Twitter. I don't understand what, and this is the whole thing with Jamal Adams, too. All the fights on Twitter, it's like, Jordan, just go out there and cover somebody, man. Like, I know you had some interceptions and stuff, but go out there and cover somebody and make some tackles, and don't worry about what people are saying on social media. Jamal Adams, I've said this before, he's better than what they have, and he's probably going to have to take a 1-year prove-it deal. I don't know about the chemistry in the locker room, and obviously we know that it could get thorny if things don't go well. But you have to admit this, Ryan. I think this is indisputable. It would be worth it just to see him at the introductory press conference, having to interact with all these beat reporters that he has so much animosity towards, and that now have so much animosity towards him.
Dude, the 𝐀𝐟𝐟𝐢𝐥𝐢𝐥𝐢 thing where he called out his wife.
Right.
He said, yikes, screw that guy.
Right. And all the reporters that jumped in on Connor's side and all that. I actually joked with my friend Glenn Naughton of JetNation.com about this, that I would almost want the Jets to sign him just for that press conference, have him stand there for an hour, and then right after the press conference, the Jets are like, all right, you're released. See you later. Like, it would be worth it just for that press conference.
That's worth the vet minimum. I don't care if I got to burn, $1.7 million or whatever it is. Worth it to have that level of burn. Oh, man. Real quick, Hennessy Heisman says, how much playing time will Will McDonald get this year? What do you think?
I mean, I would expect, especially if Huff isn't back, that you're going to see something similar to what you saw with Jermaine Johnson from year 1 to year 2 in terms of the number of snaps getting increased. And what you hear is that Will McDonald is already back at the facility, working out and getting right back at it. He wants it. And if you read about his journey, I mean, this is another guy who's a very good kid. He's earned everything along the way. And I assume that that's what will happen, is that you will see him get significantly more snaps and playing time in 2024. Now, is he going to make that same leap that Jermaine Johnson made? I think he certainly could. And I'll tell you this right now. While I think Jermaine Johnson is going to be a more well-rounded player than Will McDonald, I think Will McDonald has significantly more upside as a pure pass rusher, just because I think he's a better athlete and he's just got such a wide variety of different ways to win. So if he hits his ceiling, he could be a really, really good pass rusher. But yeah, we'll see if he's able to do it, though. This year, he should get more opportunities, especially if Huff is gone and certainly seems like that's probably going to be what happens.
Yeah, and not to mention we're not going to have Lawson either. So to some degree, there's going to be snaps, overflowing from that already. So yeah, I would agree. I would hope to see the same, similar percentage. I think Jermaine Johnson played about 50 or 60% of the snaps this past year, where Huff played, I think, 40, and I think McDonald was somewhere around like 20 or just under 20% of the snaps. He was a lot lower. But that is going to take us to the end of our show. So I want to thank you, Scott, for coming on. If you guys don't follow Scott over on Play Like a Jet, you 100% should. Great video breakdowns, awesome podcast. Scott, anything you got, going on that you want to share with everyone?
Ryan, first of all, thanks for having me on. And if you want to do this again next week or whenever, just let me know. I'm always down to join you. I love talking to you. As I joked with you, you are a normal guy in a very abnormal space. So it's good to interact with you and talk Jets. And I always love having conversations with people about this. And that's a lot of what we're doing right now on Play Like a Jet. We're doing a lot of the off-season roundtables. Ryan, you participated in one of them. And what I'm doing is I'm getting a mixture of people that are in Jets world, whether they're a content creator, reporter, whatever, and then people that are just big Jets fans that aren't necessarily in Jets world and don't necessarily get the opportunity to talk about the Jets on a regular basis. And we're doing roundtables. I'm getting different vantage points of where are you at with the team, what you think of 2023, Saleh, Douglas, Rodgers, the draft free agency, and some other fun stuff. Recently we had on, you were on, Ryan, also Pete Hoffman from WFAN, who's the producer for BT and Sal. On Q, my friend who's a rapper is going to come back on. He's produced some stuff for Eminem, and he's a big Jets fan, so he'll be on the show. Ed Valley, who's a really well-known meteorologist, came on. He's a huge Jets fan. Also recently, my friend Evan Goldschneider from The Real Housewives of New Jersey, who's a huge Jets fan, he came on and he had an interesting theory about Joe Douglas, and it pertains to the movie Dave, if you've ever heard of that movie. So we're doing a lot of that. We're also doing, obviously, the Combine is coming up, so we'll be doing daily reports with my friend George Bremer, who covers the Colts for CNHI Sports and Indy. He'll be at the Combine, and he'll be calling me, and we'll be doing daily reports. We'll be doing draft stuff after free agency, but free agency previews. We've got news and notes every week, mailbag stuff. Randy Lang, who spent many years with the Bergen Record as a Jets beat reporter and is now writing for NewYorkJets.com. He's been coming on and taking us inside the numbers. The thing I love about Randy is the man is just an absolute encyclopedia of fun stuff. So you ask him a question about Breece Hall, and he'll rattle off like 6 things about Breece Hall stats-wise that you couldn't ever have possibly imagined knowing. So I love having Randy on. He's a blast. He's going to continue to come on. And then, like I said, it'll be full speed ahead. Free agency. My buddy Walter Cherepinski of WalterFootball.com is going to be on. We'll review free agency each day, and then he'll help us get through the draft. I'm going to have my usual lineup of draft people that'll come on. I'll talk to people from different schools where, let's say there's a college that has multiple prospects that the Jets could be interested in. We'll do a lightning round. And what I like to do, Ryan, is I'll have somebody on. So let's say University of Georgia. All right, come on. We'll talk about Cedric Van Pran. We'll talk about Brock Bowers. We'll talk about Amarius Mims, whatever. And we'll do lightning round stuff. And then if the Jets draft one of those guys, I'll bring back on and we'll do an in-depth thing on that particular player. We'll go from, the time they were born and were in diapers all the way up through the point where they get drafted by the Jets, so that people get a better opportunity to get to know these kids. So we continue, man. It's 365 days a year of Jets content. I've been doing that. We're about to finish the 7th year. So we're heading into year 8 of Play Like a Jet. June 2nd will be the anniversary. Started at June 2nd, 2017. So never stops. Even though you would think this is the downtime, there's still always stuff to talk about. You know that better than most.
Oh man, this is the off season is our in season. It feels weird. Like when we're actually in season, it's like, man, I don't even know how to make content about this stuff right now. It's just so weird. Scott, I really appreciate you coming on. You're more than welcome anytime. Boys and girls, make sure you head over to Play Like a Jet. Give them a follow. If you're still hanging out in here and you haven't hit the like button, hit that like button. And don't forget to drop a comment down below after this has aired. Scott, thank you so much for coming on. Before we head off and do the closing, I do want to thank the sponsor of the channel, Aura. If you guys do not know what Aura is, this thing is an awesome all-in-one app for security, identity theft, like prevention. It is incredible. All the scammers and spammers that you get to your email, that absolutely drives you bonkers. I 100% recommend getting this tracker. It's a 14-day free trial. It'll get you pulled off all these data brokers lists. It has been driving me bonkers, and now all I have to do is click on there, and it says it's monitoring 18 different lists that I'm on, and now it's gonna boot it off. Not to mention you get a VPN, you get antivirus protection. It's a really, really good deal. I think if you guys try just the free trial, you'll want to continue with it moving forward. But either way, thank you for supporting the channel. This is Jets Talk signing off. JETS.